but that's okay. I don't mind. Chapters 36 and 37 of Isaiah are kind of a high point, sort of a peak point in the book of Isaiah. Not that it gets worse after this. I mean, it keeps getting better. If Isaiah is a mini Bible, which it is, then we're nearing the New Testament. The New Testament in Isaiah. So we get to chapter 39, that's would represent Malachi, and Isaiah 40 would be equivalent to Matthew. And so there's a lot of good things ahead, don't get me wrong, but much of the previous 35 chapters was pointing to the events of chapters 36 and 37. So it is a culminating point, it's a peak. Much of the first 35 chapters are picturing what's going to occur here in 36 and 37, prophesying about it, foretelling of it, setting the stage for it. And so that's kind of what happens here in chapter 36. The stage is being set. And in chapter 37, chapter 37 is very satisfying because a problem is being introduced in chapter 36 that's been spoken of. And in chapter 37, the problem is solved. And it's always satisfying when God solves a problem. And the stage is set and the problem is solved in 37. One of the biggest moments in all of Hebrew history, especially for the kingdom of Judah, nigh unto being obliterated. That happened with Mordecai and Esther. That happened at that time in Persia, almost obliterated but spared. But you think of the most monumental times in the entire history of this people. This is one of them. I mean, the world's preeminent power, the Assyrians, just one stone's throw away from destroying them all completely, and the opposite happens. I'm not going to be a spoiler for you because we've been talking about it. So much of the content of this book has been leading up to it that it's a little bit of a spoiler alert. You already know what happens because we've been alluding to it and we've been talking about it, but the Lord does smite 185,000 soldiers in one night to spare the kingdom of Judah. And it's a lot like a sequel to David and Goliath. The enemy of God is a blasphemer of God. He publicly taunts and threatens and intimidates God's people. That's what Goliath did. Deliverance at this point in chapter 36, when we get to the end of chapter 36, deliverance seems completely impossible from a human perspective. They're at a spot where it's like, Goliath, what are you going to do? how is this possibly going to work out for us? And the Lord is bringing them to a point where, they are backed into a corner. Their backs are up against the wall. It seems like there's nowhere to go from here. How could we possibly get on our own wisdom, on our own power? We have no chance. We have no hope. All we have left is God. A supernatural act from God is the only way that they can be delivered, that they can get out of this predicament that they're in. And so, we ought to go to him before that point, but often it takes getting to that point for us to actually go to him, because that's just kind of how we are. But we should go to him first. That's what Judah should have done. They didn't. And we're kind of the same way, that we just we wait until we're backed into a corner sometimes to really plead with the Lord. We wait till things really get tough and insurmountable, and then we go to him. And yes, we should have gone to him before, but better late than never. And so we still need to look to him. So we'll get to the victory next time. That's chapter 37. But the stage here is set in 36. Goliath came out and taunted Israel for 40 days. And man, you can just kind of put yourself in the scene where Goliath is just so full of himself. He just thinks he's so invincible. He's this giant man, and no one has ever really even been able to come close to hurting him before. And he just kind of walks up and down, running and spouting off at the mouth and defying the Israel and the God of Israel, and nobody can touch me at all. And really, he was just kind of strutting his stuff and showing how big he is, and trying to rub it in their face how weak they were. And what he's doing is he's employing a tactic of intimidation. He's trying to intimidate them and scare them, and that's a tactic that he's using. A textbook villain. You think of just about a textbook perfect villain and just a bad guy. I mean, Goliath. There's some bad guys in the Bible. They are the baddest guys. They are the villains of villains. And this man here that we'll deal with in 36 is so much like that. Yeah, he's got it's the whole army of the Assyrians. It's not just the one man, but he's very Goliathian. I know I always invent words, and there's an adjective for it. He's very Goliathian or Goliath-esque, or however you want to arrange that word. But the man, a lot of people think his name is Rabshakeh. Rabshakeh is his title. The king of Assyria who he's representing is Sennacherib. Sometimes in my notes I'll write Seni, but Sennacherib is the king's name, and the Rabshakeh is his chief field officer. So his commanding officer, his high-ranking Pentagon official, his highest military deputy. So the word Rabshakeh is a title, and so as we read the passage, it says Rabshakeh said this, but he was a Rabshakeh. At least that's what the historians tell us. So let's read. We're going to read the whole chapter because usually we do 4, 5, 6, 7 verses at a time. But this is one narrative it's one exchange back and forth that doesn't really make any sense to break down into smaller clusters. So let's just read the entire exchange here. Isaiah 36 verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defense cities of Judah and took them. 2 Kings tells us there were 46 of them. So he's got 46 cities of Judah already. Verse 2, and the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah, Asaph's son, the recorder. And Rabshakeh said unto them, say ye now to Hezekiah, thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, what confidence is this, wherein thou trustest? I say, sayest thou, but they are but vain words, I have counsel and strength for war. Now on whom dost thou trust, that thou rebellest against me? Lo, thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt, whereon if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all that trust in him. But if thou say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and said to Judah and to Jerusalem, ye shall worship before this altar? Now therefore give pledges, I pray thee, to my master, the king of Assyria, and I will give thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? And am I now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it? The Lord, you can see his eyes rolling. The Lord said unto me, go up against this land and destroy it. Well, the Lord didn't tell him that. He doesn't know the Lord, but he sure is blaspheming. Verse 11, then said Eliakim and Shebna and Joah unto Rabshakeh, speak, I pray thee, unto thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it. And speak not to us in the Jews' language in the ears of the people that are on the wall. But Rabshakeh said, hath my master sent me to thy master, and to thee to speak these words? Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, that they may eat their own dung and drink their own piss with you? Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, which they asked him not to, and said, hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus saith the king, let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, and eat ye every one of his vine, and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware, lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Have any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? So that's his tirade, his, I don't know what you call it, monologue. Verse 21, how did they respond, these three guys? But they held their peace and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was saying, answer him not. So they did their duty. Then came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh. The Rabshakeh is a bully. This Rabshakeh here, he's a villain, he's a bully. I kind of sometimes hesitate to use the word bully because it's been hijacked and its meaning has been changed. The word bully used to mean someone who threatens you with physical harm and threatens to beat you up if you don't give him something that doesn't belong to him. Give me your lunch money or else I dunk you on the head, or else I give you a swirly or whatever it is. And that was a bully. I'll hurt you unless you give me this. And so he's a thief and he's taking things that don't belong to him, and he's intimidating. He's using intimidation as a tactic. He's beating up on the little kids that can't put up much of a fight. It's usually a one who's bigger and older, and it's usually the sixth grader who's bullying around the third graders because might makes right. And that's very much what this Rab Sheikah is behaving like. Now, of course, that meaning has been changed today. And bullying now, Mrs. Obama went on her big, long crusade against bullying. And what bullying has become now is just disagreeing with something. If you just offer any opposing viewpoints at all, you're bullied. And if you even try to persuade somebody against one of the prevailing leftist perspectives, then you're bullied. And so it's changed, but I'm using that word in its classic sense, in what it's supposed to mean. When I refer to this Rab Sheikah, they use force to get their way. The bully cannot win with facts, cannot win with reason, cannot persuade. The bully does not have truth on their side, does not have justice on their side, so they are left resorting to force. And they resort to force because they've got nothing else. And that's how he's operating here. And of course, that's what Jesus' opponents did. That's how they put Jesus to death. They couldn't find a good crime to charge him with. He wasn't guilty of anything. So what did they have to do? Force it. They couldn't give him a fair trial. Then he would have been acquitted very easily. And so they had to cheat, and they had to lie, and they had to kill. And they couldn't do it justly. And so this is a very anti-Christ mindset to behave that way. And we can relate to this. That's how the world deals with us. We are at the pressure of a world around us that's crooked. We're in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, and the world bears down on us. We look at history as others have behaved this way. And rather than persuading with reason and with logic and with facts, people just use force. And it's an anti-Christ mindset. You think of the Muslims for 1,300 years. If you don't agree with us, we'll just cut your head off. So they don't have to make a better theological point. They don't have to prove that their book that was written 700 years after the Bible was complete, they know they can't win any of those arguments theologically or factually or historically. So we'll just cut your head off if you disagree. The Roman Catholic Church did the same thing for 1,500 years. If you disagree with us, we'll just burn you at the stake. There's countless examples of that. The Church of England was doing the same thing for a very long time. And we see that even today. They did that to our Baptist people. You want to baptize? We'll just drown you. We'll just hold you under there. And unless you agree with infant baptism, we'll just kill you. But we see it with the LGBT crowd today and how they want to. Well, if you don't agree with us on this behavior and on this viewpoint, we'll just try to throw you in jail. We'll just try to fine you. We'll just try to incarcerate you. We'll just try to pass hate crimes laws. We'll just try to get you locked up and penalized by force. And so rather than actually winning the argument with reason, they just use force. And so that's kind of what we see here. And so I've titled our message tonight, The World's Intimidation Tactics. That's a little bit of a mouthful, I suppose, but the world's intimidation tactics. Because, of course, we've got folks that do the same with us, belittle us, mock us for believing the Bible. And that's what this man does here. You're so stupid. You're listening to, the people you're listening to are all wrong, and we're bigger and tougher. Verse 15, neither let Hezekiah make you believe this. Verse 16, hearken not to Hezekiah. Verse 18, beware lest Hezekiah persuade you. You're stupid, and that's why we're going to kill you. That's why we're bigger and stronger than you, and you listen to someone you ought not to be listening to. And so they threaten, and he's threatening, and the world threatens us, intimidates us, bullies us, and we get back into a corner too. And that's what Antichrist is going to do and want to do. And that's what the devil wants to do with the world today, is just back us into a corner for our stand for truth, for our faith. And, what we I think need to understand is there's victory. Even though they're backed into a corner, the next chapter, there's victory. And, Jesus is dead and buried for day one and day two, but there's victory coming. Often when it seems like you're backed into a corner, David sure looked like, what's this little boy going to do against Goliath? He's 3 times taller and there's just no hope. But often when we're backed into a corner and it seems like we've got no options and no hope and we couldn't possibly emerge from the situation intact, often that's when God is setting the stage. And that's when there's a victory right next door. And God is actually making his victory even more glorifying to him by how rough the odds look for us, how bad the chances look for us. And so that's what the Lord is doing here. So Hezekiah's representatives are mentioned. They're Shebna, Eliakim, and Joah. You might remember that name Shebna from chapter 22. I mentioned it on Sunday. That was the fella that was having a monument carved out of stone to himself. That was the fella that was building his own sepulcher and trying to glorify himself. And so the debate is the Shebna of chapter 36 the same Shebna of chapter 22? I don't believe that it is. Seems odd that somebody with the same name, affiliated with the same people, would be a different one, but the one in chapter 22 was a treasurer. The one in chapter 36 is called a scribe. They're different offices. One is civil, one is religious. And ultimately, the one in chapter 2 was a bad guy, and the one in chapter 36 is a good guy. So unless he did a 180 conversion to becoming a believer and repented of everything he was going to do, and really God guaranteed his fate in chapter 22 and told him how he was going to die. Unless he repented and changed everything and changed jobs, it's probably a different guy. But maybe he changed jobs too. I don't know. Anyway, I'll just give you a couple things here tonight. Intimidation tactics are used by the dishonest. Intimidation tactics are used by the dishonest. An honest person doesn't need to resort to cheap tricks. You don't have to do that. Intimidation is a cheap trick. We threaten as gospel preachers, our gospel message that we give to the lost, are we threatening force? Kinda, but not really. I'm certainly not threatening anyone that I'm going to beat them over the head or cut their head off or incarcerate them if they don't accept the message that I'm giving. I am warning them of some force that's coming, but that's in a world to come. I'm telling them hell is hot, and you will go there, and you deserve it. You don't have to. I'm giving you Jesus' message. He's offering you a way out of that. He's offering you heaven. But if you turn it down, you will burn in hell. And there will be people the atheists will say to us, well, you're coercing too. You're threatening too. You're intimidating too. You're using force too. No, the hellfire doesn't touch them till the next world. And that regards belief in what God says is next. I'm not threatening them with a single drop of flame or fire here on the side. And so you can't blame that on me. I'm not producing that for them. Now, I'm also warning them that there could be some trouble for them in this life too. Because if you die without Christ, yes, you'll go to hell. But if you live an ungodly life here, you're going to have some chastening and punishment here too. It's just that God's going to do it to you, not me. and I'm not going to argue that God's going to use me to do it to you, because God has told me not to hurt you. So I'm giving you the message, but I'm not going to intimidate you with force. I'm going to give you God's word. I'm going to use reason. I'm going to persuade, but not use force. Isaiah had already said, so these are dishonest people that use this tactic, that just use force and intimidation. And we can see that this is a dishonest people, the Assyrians. Isaiah had already referred to them as treacherous. Remember, we said that treacherous means dishonestly entering a covenant knowing that you're going to break it. They're truce breakers. They renege on promises. And here they are. They had already made an agreement with Judah to protect them if they received the agreed upon amount of tribute. And they did. Prior to this occasion, they had said, look, we're not going to hurt you if you just give us a bunch of money. Pay us tribute. And so Hezekiah said, okay. And it's kind of sad. You read 2 Kings 18 and 19, and there's Hezekiah running around the king's palace and running around the temple, scrounging up as much gold as he could find, even gold from the vessels, the sacred furnishings of the temple, so he can give them the king's Syria. So he can pay off the tribute and pay off the bully and keep them away according to the agreements. And yet, here they are taking 46 cities and bearing down, ready to take Jerusalem too. So they had already made an agreement, made a covenant, and they're breaking it. And they're threatening to take a city, even though they received the agreed upon funds, and saying, hey, give us, but now they're asking for more money. They're saying, the Rav Sheka here is saying, look at verse 8. Now therefore give pledges, and I'll give you military aid. Hey, let's make a deal. Let's make an agreement. Give me some pledges, and we'll give you some horses if you can put riders on them. He says in verse 16, hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me. Why in the world would Judah make an agreement with somebody who's literally in the process of breaking their previous agreement? What incentive would you have to strike a deal with somebody who is already in the process of breaking the last deal that you struck with them? What confidence do you have no reason to think they would keep, if they're not keeping the last one, why would they keep the next one? So there's no motivation at all for this envoy from Hezekiah of Joah and Eliakim and Shabna to say, oh, that sounds like pretty fair terms. Yes, let's arrange a surrender and we'll capitulate and we'll give you this and we'll just shake hands and call it all good and we'll all go home. Why would you do that with somebody who's already shredded up every previous contract that you've made with them? It's bad and dishonest people that operate this way. And yet these three guys are very respectful. Look, you're being vile, sir. And there's some of our people that are listening to this conversation over here on this wall. Will you please just not speak to us the way that you're being just crass and you're being just base? And we don't want our people to hear the things that you're saying. Would you please just use the Syrian language? Some scholars say, Aramaic was the language of diplomacy. And so because this is a diplomatic envoy and they're having a very official conversation, that typically this was done in Aramaic. This says Syrian. Either way, this folks from Hezekiah didn't want it in Hebrew, in the Jews' language, and yet he completely disregards and ignores their request and just talks even louder and even more brash in the very language that he was asked not to use. And so it just tells you that there's no good faith negotiating at all. That they don't mean anything they're saying. They're planning on just coming in and trying to kill everybody anyway. They just want to be given some of the goodies up front so they don't have to go and fight them. And there's just no decency displayed by him whatsoever. And that's the kind of people that use this tactic. Why have decency when you've got force? And so he gets more brash. Just a bad man, a very bad man. And a dishonest man. Then number two, used to intimidation tactics. Number one are used by dishonest people. Number two, used to blaspheme. Used by dishonest people and used to blaspheme. This man here is a flagrant blasphemer of the living God, just like Goliath was. He is a reprobate of all reprobates. You might recall chapter 17 prophesied of this moment. Chapter 17 talks about blasphemers, and it says that they are like noisy, rushing waters of the sea. They're very loud. And that's how the sea is, those rushing waters. When the sea is tempestuous, you can hear that slapping against the rocks, and it just doesn't quit. But chapter 17 says, but at eventide, it is no more. And that's how blasphemers are. They're loud, and you can hear them even when you don't want to hear them, and you can hear them from far away. But when God's done with them, they're done. And at eventide, it is no more. And the New Testament agrees with that. The book of Jude, those who speak great swelling words against God, blasphemy, great swelling words against God, are called raging waves of the sea. And so the word of God all works in agreement here. Jude agrees with Isaiah. And here that portion of Isaiah in chapter 17 was depicting this moment. It was speaking of this Rabshakeh who would appear in chapter 36. And so these things all come together. The irony of the blasphemer is astounding. The Rabshakeh here, in his message to this envoy, is actually using a lot of the same words and same phrases that Isaiah used in his preaching to the kingdom of Judah. He asked them a lot of the same questions. Look at verse 4. Okay, how ironic is that? That someone who disbelieves in the living God would use a lot of the same phrases and expressions as the preacher of the living God. Verse 4, what confidence is this wherein thou trustest? That's the same question Isaiah had for them. What do you trust in? Who do you really believe in? Verse 5, whom dost thou trust? Who do you trust? Man, that's convicting coming from our enemy, but that's good preaching. Where is your confidence? Who do you trust? Verse 15, he uses phrases like trust in the Lord. Neither let Hezekiah make you, and you can hear his eye rolling, and you can see his eyes rolling, you can hear the arrogance, you can hear the sarcasm in his tone, in his attitude. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. You can hear the dismissiveness. Don't let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. He thinks he's being funny. Verse 18, beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, here he's going to mock, the Lord will deliver us. Hey, you little Jews are running around saying your Lord's going to deliver you. What a bunch of dorks you are. What a bunch of wusses you are. Your Lord's going to deliver you. Whoo! really the worst of it is verse 10. And I am now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it. So yeah, of course I don't have the Lord. But yet the Lord said unto me. So I don't believe in your Lord, but the Lord said unto me, I'm going to destroy your city, and the Lord told me to. He's pretending to be a prophet, mocking the prophets. I mean, a man without God, without hope, who hates God, going around saying, listen to me, I'm a preacher. Whew. It's on thin ice, on very thin ice with God. Those that use this tactic, boy, he's blind to the irony. Days later, just days later, the Lord is in fact going to deliver this people from him and his people. I mean, God is going to, because Hezekiah trusted in the Lord and exercised confidence in the Lord, God was the things that he just mocked were all going to come to pass. The things that he dismissed and made sound so silly and trivial and juvenile and stupid, every single one of them was going to happen just a few days later. And there's no way he survived. And then lastly, used by the incorrect. So used by the dishonest, used to blaspheme, and used by the incorrect. Isn't it amazing how the least informed people are usually the loudest? It's almost like they're compensating for how little they actually know. If I just shout it at the top of my lungs, then it'll have some merit, even though they know the least about it, the most brash. But listen, being brash doesn't make you right any more than might makes right. It doesn't. Might doesn't make you right, and brashness and truth and correctness will never ever be dependent on volume. You can be correct and factual and right and speak quietly. Shouting louder isn't going to make you right if you're wrong, but a lot of people think so. Now, the interesting thing is that the Rabshakeh actually was right on a couple things, and that's usually how people get their overconfidence. They were right on a couple things, and so they assume that they must be right on everything else. And they get very arrogant and filled with themselves because they were right about a couple things. And so what are some things that he was right about? Verse 6, he says, Lo, thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt. He's right about that. Egypt, Judah had trusted in Egypt. Isaiah had already rebuked them for it. Isaiah had already said, that agreement that you made with Egypt is a covenant with death. You think Egypt is going to protect you from Assyria? God says they're not. Isaiah told Hezekiah and his cabinet that don't trust in Egypt to protect you from Assyria. They can't. And a few chapters ago, Isaiah said, you're going down to Egypt to trust in chariots and to trust in horses because the Egyptians are men and not God. And the Rabshakeh knew that had happened and was right about it. He said, yeah, if you trust it. He had experienced firsthand that the inferiority of the Egyptian army compared with the Assyrian army. He knew their army was vastly superior to the Egyptians, and he knew that if the Jews were trusting in Egypt, that was a broken reed, that stood no chance at all. So he absolutely was right about that, and he was right in verse 14. Thus saith the king, let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. He was right about that. Hezekiah can't deliver them. Hezekiah himself had no ability whatsoever to deliver the kingdom of Judah from Assyria. His own cleverness, he did not have the wit to outmaneuver an army that dwarfed the Jews' army. And so it wasn't going to be his intellect, it wasn't going to be his figuring or his strategy that solved the problem. Hezekiah couldn't do it. And so he was right about that. And the world is right sometimes. Not because they're agreeing with God. The world sometimes accidentally stumbles into agreeing with God, but they don't even know they're doing it. Oftentimes atheists will make a point not realizing that they're actually agreeing with God while making, their assumptions are things that God has already said. So they'll accidentally or inadvertently borrow from what God has said, not because they want to honor him, they don't even know they're doing it. And Jesus said sometimes the children of this world are wiser than the children of light on certain things. And so that does happen, but they're wrong on so much more than they're right on. and the Rabshakeh was wrong. So he hit a couple things there, but he was wrong on a whole lot more. Let me give you just a few things he was wrong about. Verse 7, but if thou say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and said to Judah and to Jerusalem, ye shall worship before this altar? He's saying, I heard that your king went around dismantling the high places and all these other altars that were around your country. And so your God must be weakened by that. He had no clue that those were idols that Hezekiah was taking down, and that actually honored God. He was under the false impression that, well, any God is going to be strengthened by all the different little altars that are placed in different places. And so when Hezekiah went around and said, no, that's an altar to Baal, tear that down. That's an altar to Ashtaroth, tear that down. The high places where idols are being lifted up, tear all those down. The Rabshakeh heard about that and said, oh, that can't be good. I mean, if your God can't keep all those places open, how strong could he be? He was totally wrong about that. He didn't have any understanding of really what the Jews' religion was at all and what their beliefs were at all. So he was wrong about that more altars means more power. It depends who the altars to. And that really goes into the next one. He thought all gods are the same. They're all the same. Verses 18 and 19. Beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying the Lord will deliver us. Have any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of this people? Where are the gods of that people? He thought, how could your God be any different than theirs? They're all the same. I mean, anyone that's got a religion, they're all the same. Atheists say that. Islam and Christian are basically the same. Oh, you're a Baptist. Well, Baptist and Catholic, or Baptist and Episcopalian, or Lutheran and Methodist. It's really all the same. No, it's not. Things that are different are not the same. And what intellectual laziness that is. To just lump things together that actually are nuanced. That's just unwillingness to really think. But it's easy if you could just tell yourself, it's all the same. That'll justify me, and just kind of steer clear of all of it. Just let me generalize. Let me just lump you all into one group. That way I don't actually have to think, to separate and understand the difference. It's all the same. And all these gods, Egypt and Sepharium and Israel and the northern kingdom and Arphaxad, they're all the same. Your God couldn't possibly be any different than theirs. Their gods couldn't help them when we defeated them. So how would your God help you when we come to defeat you? Well, this is the people that have the God who can hear prayer. This is the people that have the God who is alive and not deaf and not dumb and not an idol and not an inanimate object. This is the true and living God. That's very different. And beliefs, the differences in beliefs is actually very important, because those people prayed to something that couldn't hear them, and that's why they weren't delivered. And those people prayed to a powerless object that, of course, couldn't deliver them. But the Jews are praying to a God that has complete power over Assyria and the Rabshakeh and Sennacherib. And the last thing that he was wrong on is he believed that past victories guarantee future ones. Past victories guarantee future ones. That's not true at all. Just because you've won before doesn't mean you'll win again. You go undefeated and then lose the next one. Past victories don't at all guarantee future ones. He says, because I haven't been stopped before, that means I won't be. Look at all these other wars we won. I haven't been stopped, so how could you stop me? They're overconfident because of the victories they had been permitted to win. They were not aware, and chapter 10 points to this. In chapter 10, Isaiah says, Assyria is just a rod in my hand. I used them, I raised them up so I could judge other nations, and that's why they had defeated the enemies of theirs that are mentioned in 18 and 19. God says, I was judging the wickedness of those other nations, and you were just a rod in my hand. But when I'm done judging those nations that I raised you up to knock around, I discard the rod. I don't need it anymore. And then you're done. And that's what chapter 10, and so that's pointing to this very moment. Actually, Isaiah 10 talks about how you're just an axe, and shall the axe boasteth against him that heweth therewith? You're just an axe that God was using to chop down a tree, and when the tree is chopped down, he doesn't need the axe anymore. So how could the axe turn around to the person holding it and say, I'm stronger than you are? You're just the axe in his hand is all you are. And so chapter 10 was picturing this moment here in chapter 36. I'm sure Goliath thought the same thing. Well, I've won all my previous battles. How could this puny kid do anything different? In fact, it doesn't matter whether he's puny or not. I always win. I've always won before. Why would I stop winning now? What's different here? They thought that there was no God that could stop them or punish them or get in their way. And is that not what we hear from the world? Well, you Christians tell me I shouldn't do this, or you tell me your Bible's against this particular thing that I enjoy, and you've all said that God's going to judge that, but look at me now. I'm fine. No problems. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I'm going to keep doing it. You just keep testing your luck. It ain't going to last forever. well, previously it's all been victory, and I haven't really had any judgment. I haven't really had any problems. I grew up in church, and I grew up in a Christian school, and all the preachers said bad things will happen if you do this, but I've been doing them, and no bad things have happened, so I'll be fine. Just keep it up. Just keep it up. Because what was around the corner for Rabshakeh? What was around the corner for Goliath? Past ease and past victories do not at all guarantee future ones. Very representative. How often do we hear, you guys believe in a rapture, but boy, it's been 2,000 years, it hasn't happened yet. And every time someone says that, they're fulfilling what 2 Peter said. I mean, we're told that they'll say that. Well, where's the promise of his coming? You say your Lord is coming for you, and Christians have been saying that for 2,000 years. In other words, us Christ rejectors have been right for 2,000 years. We've won all these arguments because he hasn't come back yet, so that must just continue. That'll guarantee future success with our position. No, just keep it up. There's a day coming when that won't be the case anymore, and it's coming in the future. They'll get theirs one day. Even if we get martyred, those who martyr us will get theirs one day. And just because they were able to kill us doesn't mean that their day isn't coming. There is a payday someday, and that's really one of the central themes of this book. I'll close with just a couple interesting little notes here. This contingent here, these three guys, Eliakim, Joah, and Shabna, they handled their Goliath so differently than David did. That's fascinating to me, I guess, because Hezekiah's faith, it's Hezekiah whose faith really changes things. And back with David and Goliath, it was David's faith who changes things. But David responded to Goliath's blasphemy with directness, pointing the finger. I'm going to serve you up to the carcasses, your carcass up to the fowls of the air. I'm going to take your head off, big boy. But Shebna and Eliakim and Joah, they were told by Hezekiah to not say anything, and they did. And I think that's fascinating. The difference between, it's kind of a sequel to the same movie, but this scene is a little bit different. And so the attention sort of shifts over to Hezekiah, because the ball now is in Hezekiah's court. These three guys just work for him, just like the ball was in David's court. And the other interesting thing is where this encounter took place. It's in verse 2. This took place, he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. One of Isaiah's favorite meeting spots, some 20 years earlier. That is the exact spot where Isaiah confronted Ahaz. I believe Ahaz is, there was one in between. Ahaz, I believe he's Hezekiah's dad. Uzziah was before Ahaz. I might be getting that mixed up, but a previous king, 20-some years earlier, met in that same place, that same spot, and was offered a very similar ultimatum. Isaiah said, look, Syria and Ephraim are gathering against you. God says to be quiet and do nothing. But you want to go form alliances, like in that case with these very same people, with the Assyrians. And so you have a choice to make. You can exercise faith in God and do nothing, or you can not exercise faith in God and have faith in yourself and in your diplomacy. And Ahaz did not want a sign. Isaiah told him, ask for a sign, I'll give it to you. And he said, no, I don't want to. What a wasted opportunity that was. So, well, then I'll give you a sign, a virgin shall conceive. And that's where we get our prophecy about the virgin birth, in that very same spot. And then 20-some years later, this conversation between these three guys representing Hezekiah and this Rabshakeh, that happens in the exact same spot. And this time, the message is relayed to King Hezekiah, and he does exercise faith. And he does get deliverance. And there's redemption for the failure of faith that occurred in that very same place, the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. God, man, he pays attention to every little detail. And that's so cool how that one spot that was a place of failure and a place of defeat, 20-some years later, becomes a place of victory, the difference being faith. The difference being how the problem is responded to and who the person with the problem looks to. It makes all the difference. Praise the Lord that he can fix all of even when our backs are against the wall, God's going to do something. We just have to believe him. Heavenly Father, give us courage to stand